Andreas, you should be able to speak now.
Okay, excellent. I would like to make a very brief comment about Europe's role. In my view, Europe should stand with Hong Kong, but unfortunately, Germany stands in the way. So from a very recent media report by Spiegel Online, we learned that Chancellor Merkel apparently considers Xi Jinping's China a lesser evil in comparison to Trump's America. And I think that is unacceptable. In my view, Chancellor Merkel probably has been in power for too long, and she now positions Germany and by extension Europe contrary to global public opinion. And so I'll come to my point here. 2 weeks ago, I started the petition, Europe can no longer afford Germany's failed China policy of change through trade. We now already have more than 7,000 supporters. So if you agree with me that Germany and by extension Europe should change its China policy and stand with Hong Kong, please head over to change.org and co-sign the petition. And please also invite your friends, family members, and colleagues to do the same. Thank you.
Thanks
so much for that.
Oh, sorry, John.
No. Craig, I think the easiest thing to do is technically, given that you're in charge, you should do all bringing in and obviously posing the questions rather than me getting in your way. Thank you.
Okay, well, what I'll do is we'll get all the questions asked, and then we'll hand over to the panel for comments on those, if that sounds all right. That's probably the best way to do it. So I'm going to invite Jeff Henderson to talk now.
Hi, I'm Jeff Henderson, professor at the University of Bristol, but I live in Leeds, and a member of Leeds Northwest CLP. I spent 10 years living and working in Hong Kong. I've done a considerable amount of work on Hong Kong's political, economic, and social development. I'd like to say, first of all, that I totally endorse the comments from Joshua Wong and his call for sanctions. Specifically, however, it seems to me these need to be sanctions that target the Chinese Communist Party and not the Chinese people. There are important distinctions here, which including within the party itself, which Paul Mason underlined very well. My suggestions, therefore, are these. It seems to me there needs to be a call for an investigation into the investments of Xi Jinping and other senior members of the CCP and the Chinese government on their families. In as far as those investments may be in Britain or in British tax havens, there ought to be moves to block those investments. Secondly, there should be an attempt to block any further participation by state-owned Chinese nuclear power companies in the rollout of nuclear power, which is currently taking place at the Hinkley Point plant in Somerset, but with plans for new Chinese involvement, further Chinese involvement in new plants in both Suffolk and in Essex. That should be banned. I support Joshua Wong's call with regard to Huawei and the exclusion of Huawei from Britain's 5G networks. I would go even further than this with regard to the financial basis of the CCP, because this is what these sanctions would be designed to hit. I would argue that a campaign needs to be mounted to deregister the 4 Chinese banks that operate in Britain. By definition, these are state-owned banks. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jeff. I'm going to invite Sasha to speak now, and then I will start reading out questions unless there is anyone else indicating. Sasha, you should be able to speak.
Is it? That's recording.
Sorry, Martin.
Hello, Sasha.
Hello, hi.
Hi.
I'm Sasha Ismail. I'm a socialist and Labour movement activist in Labour Party member in South London. I just wanted to say thank you to the speakers and thank you also to the organisers of the meeting. I think the work that's being done to raise this issue specifically in the UK Labour movement is incredibly important, and I think it's very heartening to, well, it's very, very heartening to hear from the comrades in Hong Kong, it's also very heartening to see this meeting being chaired by the Assistant General Secretary of PCS, and also to hear the contribution from Ben from the Fire Brigade Union earlier. So well done to everyone involved. I want to ask two questions. The first is, what is the attitude of activists in Hong Kong to the Black Lives Matter and anti-police violence protests in the US and elsewhere? And secondly, given the fact that it seems clear that the existing Hong Kong government is not going to stop being heavily controlled by China, how can the people of Hong Kong in addition to exercising the right to protest, win democracy, win a government that represents them?
So if you could start reading out the questions, please, Gareth.
Great. Thanks very much, John. Okay, we've had a number of questions. I'm not sure if we'll be able to ask all of them, but I'm going to try and ask the majority of them. So to the panelists, from Don, how is the protest movement relating to other democracy struggles across China, in Xinjiang, Tibet, for independent trade unions, etc.? From Craig, the Chinese government obviously restrict press freedoms, so what are good resources to keep informed about the day-to-day situation in Hong Kong? Then we had some comments from David about thanks to Peter Tatchell for his strong support. I think Sasha's already made this point about what's the attitude of activists in the Hong Kong movement to the anti-police protests in the US. Then from Jay, a similar question. How can we balance the need for global bipartisan support with the need for a principled leftist movement that rejects chauvinism and alliances with politicians such as Tom Cotton, who condemn police brutality in Hong Kong and yet call for troops to be sent in to suppress the Black Lives Matter protests? Question from Hong, who's from York Labour and the TSSA Union. Since the workers of the People's Republic of China are also uncomfortable with the leadership and further erosion of their rights, is there any chance of a workers' uprising happening? If that happens, are there chances of another mass-scale protest bigger than 1989 might happen across the country? Then question from, a comment from Edmund. Thanks to the panelists for excellent revelations of the clear and present threat of the emboldened CCP and their determination to enforce and promote and export the Chinese communist version of authoritarianism to the rest of the world and to regions in China. A question from Pi to Joshua's comment on sanctions. Wouldn't sanctions hurt workers in mainland China? And then from Nikolai, many Hong Kongers have welcomed the US president's announcement that the US will be withdrawing Hong Kong's special status. I understand that this is because they believe it will interrupt capital flow into China and will help achieve Lam Chao, we burn, you burn. China has responded that it will only hurt Hong Kong. Do the panelists believe that this is a good thing for Hong Kong? And will it indeed only hurt Hong Kong? Since the umbrella movement in 2014, activists like Joshua have tried to instigate reform of Hong Kong's legislators by legitimate political means, but have had their attempts frustrated by dubious disqualifications and various other seemingly underhanded ways. Given this, and given the recent developments regarding the national security law, have all political channels been exhausted, and is civil disobedience the only course of action left? And finally, from Caroline, just come in, are there any linked protests between Uyghur Solidarity and the Hong Kong protests? So if I can hand over to the panelists, Paul, John, Carol, and Sunny, to maybe address those questions. And my apologies, Carol and Sunny, if I got my tones wrong when pronouncing the Cantonese there.
Right. It really doesn't matter. That Lam Chao thing, it's really good. Do you know what's that mean? It means a mutual demolitions, everything. Yeah, just crushed everything, including economy and the society. But I think I can partly to answer some of the questions is, how are the other parts of the struggle? You need to understand what was happening in the past few years, maybe over 10 years' time. I had many opportunities to presence in different international unions conferences. When you're looking at what CCP done in order to preparing what they want to do today, the One Belt, One Road project, they extended to so many different countries and try to manipulating this economic power, is actually asking more smaller countries to borrow money from them and to build. But what was the union doing over there? A lot of them telling me in the conferences, they knew that their governments is under Chinese pressure, but they don't know how to respond. That's the worst bit. So what we trying to do is, as a union, shall we just secure something fundamentally must be right, like human rights? Workers' rights, which is one part of the human rights, put it in any country's big or small unions collective bargaining agreement, shall we? And make sure your government will not agree anything or doing business with any countries or corporates, they are depriving of the human rights, shall we? And when you talking to more international big unions, the more anxiety you come back is how CCP doing their funding quite some of these big unions around the world. What they're doing is maybe they build off, give them money to build a new headquarters for them. Do you understand? So the situations became today was not just one reason, one story. It's been quite a period of time. So I think how to link and respond to other places of struggle, the root cause is still the same. It's still the same regime, yeah? And how we doing is, and how, can we do something to try to secure something very fundamentally about to protect human rights, including workers' rights and the liberty of our place. And this is one of the my observations. But the other thing, one of the questions is how could many of you able to access more information? I believe at least 2 or 3 more in the Facebook, a Red Balloon, which is the name of this particular site. They're able to tell so much stories about the labor activists in mainland China, how much they are suffering and what are they facing and how many of them been arrested or went missing until today. So this is one of the source, I believe, many of you are still able to access it. And at certain point, then sometimes CTU, we issue some periodic articles to tell how much we know about the workers' situations, activist situations in mainland China. But the thing is, no matter what, the thing is, if we couldn't act together globally or to respond to something internationally to secure what the fundamental rights, fundamental human rights, then it is still hard for us to telling every single time different fightings, different struggles. This is why we're here to tell, like, not only the workers in different industries, don't forget our civil servants. They are under huge pressure about their neutrality. Whenever they're trying to show their stance, to disagree what the government doing, they will be pointing the fingers towards them and telling them, you must be careful, you should be loyal and be, abide by what you have been signed during your employment contract. That means keep your mouth shut. So I think what unions can do and what others internationally can do, it's whether you are concerning, this should form part of the freedom of anyone. If that is agreeable, and could we put these all into a pressure for those companies doing international business to start from, like HSBC? What you're going to do, are we going to do to tell them in UK, in London, tell us very clear and precise what's your positions about this new social security law, national security law. What's your clear positions, HSBC? Tell us now. And the union in Britain, you have a very strong positions to ask that and let them to go nowhere. This is part of my observations and my response.